From WKGC Public Media, this is Real Talk, the place where you can enjoy the cinematic conversations frame by frame each week. I'm your host, R.L. Terry. If movies are your thing, you're in the right place for today's review of The Devil Wears Prada 2, now in cinemas nationwide. 20 years after the original film became a cultural touchstone, the characters of Runway magazine returned to a very different world, one defined not by glossy covers and editorial authority, but by layoffs, algorithms, and the steady erosion of traditional media. The Devil Wears Prada 2 attempts to grapple with that reality. The story places Miranda Priestley and her staff in the middle of a changing media landscape where print magazines struggle to survive in a digital-first economy, and editorial influence is increasingly dictated by advertisers and social media trends. On paper, that is compelling material. But the film's central problem is not a lack of ideas, but is too many of them. It tries to comment on everything at once: the decline of print journalism, the tension between art and commerce, workplace culture, body image, and the ethics of the fashion industry. Each topic appears briefly, then disappears before it can be meaningfully explored, for the most part anyway. And in the process, something else disappears as well in the movie: the bite that we were so accustomed to in the original. What made the original movie so memorable was its confidence, its energy, and its unapologetic sharpness. This sequel, by contrast, in my opinion anyway, feels rather muted. The characters are recognizable, but softened, less daring, less decisive, less alive. So today we're going to talk about whether this sequel succeeds as a continuation of a beloved story, or whether it ultimately becomes a reflection of the very cultural decline it seeks to examine. And I can think of no better person to join me today than to do this deep dive into this entertaining movie. I've got my negative criticisms, folks, but at the end of the day, it's entertaining enough. So I'm just going to get that out of the way here at the top of the hour. But joining me once again is returning guest and friend of the show, film critic Sean Boelman, editor at Fandom Wire, and member of the Critics' Choice Association. Welcome back to the show, Sean.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to talk about this movie that we both just saw.
We did. So you're kind of, listeners, you're getting almost an instant reaction. Well, almost. It's almost quite literally an instant reaction, given that we've not been out of this movie very long. A little more than Sean, so I was able to put our show rundown together very quickly. But what you get today is very much a instant reaction to the film. So, Sean, let's start with what the movie is about. For those that may not have seen The Devil Wears Prada 2 yet, which is probably a lot of people listening right now, or those that may have only seen the trailer in passing once, what would you say this movie is about?
Yeah, so after 20 years, we catch back up with the characters from the first movie. So we see Andy is now a serious journalist, and Miranda is still heading up Runway. And then we see Emily in a different world that I'm going to avoid saying what that different world is, because I think that's a little bit of a spoiler territory, because that's not revealed till about 30 minutes into the movie. But we see these characters in the different stage of their life 20 years later, trying to cope with the changing nature of the fashion industry and the journalism industry.
Yeah, it certainly does. What a great premise. I mean, let's start with the premise, which is strong. I mean, it's thoughtful even, but does it land? Or, why doesn't it land? The film tackles a genuinely interesting idea. I mentioned a little bit ago in the opening, and you underscored it a moment ago, the decline of print media and the changing role of fashion magazines in a digital world. One might even suggest another angle, making a sequel about characters that are about embracing change whilst hanging on to something from 2 decades ago. All in all, the movie has something to say, but never quite finishes the sentence. And so, what do you make of some of this irony that we have that's just obvious, or at least obvious to you and I, and probably other people watching the movie from beginning to end?
Yeah, I think it's really ironic to have a movie that's a legacy sequel talk
Mm-hmm.
about why change is so important and like living with the change is necessary or else it'll go obsolete. But like we're hanging on to this IP from 20 years ago. Something else I
Mm-hmm.
said to someone else when I was sitting in the trailers for this movie was like, did I step back in a time machine? Because
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing a sequel to The Devil Wears Prada,
Mm-hmm.
and the trailers that I saw before the movie were a sequel to Meet the Parents, a sequel to Practical Magic, and a new version of Sense and Sensibility. And I'm like, am I in the 2000s again? Which is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I
No.
love studio movies of the 2000s. I think a lot of them are really funny in a way that we don't really see like that type of movie
Mm-mm.
often these days anymore. But
No.
I still think like to have a movie that's all about like fading out of relevance, but you have to revive an IP
Mm-hmm.
that's 20 plus years old because the book that this was based on was published, I think, like 3 or 4 years before the movie came out, even. So it's like one of those situations where you're trying to prove the relevance of the
Mm-hmm.
material, and like even looking at like the real world comparisons, it's an
Mm-hmm.
open secret that Miranda Priestley is in our Wintour, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody assumes that,
Mm-hmm.
and she's not the editor in chief of Vogue anymore.
No.
So
No.
like
Mm-mm.
we're in this situation where we're like, why do we care about this story anymore? And I
Yeah.
think we'll talk about this a little bit later too, I'm sure, but
Mm-hmm.
like I think the film doesn't really trust the audience to care about like the real world side of this. I
Yeah.
think it's trusting the audience only to care about the nostalgia.
Yeah. It's I think when the original came out in 2006, I don't think many people outside of high fashion could have named you the editor in chief of Vogue. So there was this kind of mysterious component to it, and so you could have fun with this idea because it was a different world back then. Nobody knew who editors in chiefs were of a lot of different magazines, media empires. I'd say the only one that people were probably most familiar with was Rupert Murdoch, but it's hard not to when you're a titan of the industry. But beyond him, I don't think we knew many. So you could have fun with that idea because it was still it was reality, but it wasn't. It was a little twist. It was a little twist on reality, and I think that makes this sequel a bit more difficult to work because now people are going to reflect specifically upon Vogue and the editor in chief, and I don't even know who the new one is. I know I was a big I mean not an upset because she resigned, but the replacement. And I forget, but people are going to be making that comparison, which then takes some of the fun out of this otherwise what should be a fun movie.
And I think
Oh, go ahead.
I think the other thing is that we've seen a lot of like copycats of this
Yeah.
formula in the
Mm-hmm.
years since the Devil Wears Prada because that movie was very influential. It was
Mm-hmm.
very successful. It was one of the, I would say, first like really, really successful
Yeah.
quote chick flicks of the
Yeah.
2000s that spurred like an entire genre
Yeah.
for like the late 2000s. So I think that like the fact that we've had so many of these movies follow this formula,
Mm-hmm.
that even though The Devil Wears Prada was quote the original,
Mm-hmm.
we're in a situation where it feels like old hat.
Yeah. Yeah. It tries to do so much, and I I think that's the Achilles heel. We'll talk about Icarus a little bit later on in the movie, and so we kind of have an Achilles heel, Icarus, a little probably a Greek tragedy in, in here. That it's very it's a less fertile ground for as far as dramatize as far as finding the conflict, finding the drama, but it still attempts to be thoughtful and on the changing media landscape. The overall, though, I feel its ambition collapses under the weight of its own excess, because while it's exploring all these different areas, cultural loss being one of them, it gets buried beneath rushed subplots and very thin character work. And that sharp bite or that satire that defined the original is just gone, or nearly absent anyway, and is replaced by facsimiles and synthesized situations and characters that just feel oddly dull and listless in this movie about high fashion. Even the poster is almost monochromatic in nature.
Well, I think on the point of it being like overstuffed, one of the biggest issues with this movie is that it doesn't really set its mind on a goal.
No.
Like we have in the original film, Andy's goal was very clear. It was like, I'm going to survive this job so I can get a better job.
Yes.
Like that was the character arc. That was the goal. That was the motivation. And then this one, only in the first 30 minutes even, like there's a crisis and it's like, if we solve this crisis, we win. And then the crisis is solved 25 minutes into it, generously. And then it's like, okay, if we get one big interview, then we can survive this. And then that big interview happens 35 minutes into the movie. And so now you're left with another hour and 15 minutes. It's like we keep kicking the football back, basically. I don't know sports, so it's a bad metaphor, but like we keep pushing back the goal of like, okay, if we do this, we'll win. But now we need to do this.
Yeah.
If we do that, we'll win. But now we need to do this. And it's just like it at a certain point, it becomes like, okay, just tell us what we need to do to win. And that's what I think this one was lacking the most for me.
And I think all of that continual accomplishment, reaching the goal, but then, oh, wait a minute. Oh, there's more road ahead. Oh, we reached that goal. Oh, we keep pushing it down the road, pushing it down the road, pushing it down the road, because we're not taking the time to develop any one of those, that it lacks this energy that we found in the first one. The original film had swagger, confidence, attitude, and sharp dialogue. Almost none of those exist in this one. But this one feels much quieter, safer, and more restrained. Even in the parts that were kind of satirically safer, which should have been funny, were not really funny. It was like there were moments for humor that were just set up, and there's no development of those moments. Oftentimes when it came to the what I like to think of as a commentary on the ridiculous level of political correctness in the workplace nowadays, and we had a couple of those moments, but the funny really wasn't there. It's as if we're in the same world, but it doesn't have the same spark.
Yeah, I thought there were like maybe 3 or 4 moments in this one that I laughed out loud, which I expected a little more comedy than it was. I was talking about this with the concession guy actually at the theater because he was saying like he'd never seen the first one. And I was like, the first one is like a 2-hour long movie that doesn't feel 2 hours long.
No, it doesn't.
Because it just moves. And this one, I think, tries to recreate that momentum by making sure that something is happening at every moment. Because there is so much that happens in this movie, as we said.
Oh, a lot. Enough for 2 or 3 Devil Wears Prada movies.
And so that's why I'm like... But this one drags, I think, compared to the first one. Not that I was ever bored, but for the first 45 minutes of this, I thought it was moving nicely, if a little bit rushed.
Yeah.
But then like because we've been conditioned for like this
Mm-hmm.
first half of the movie of this like
Yeah.
pushing the goalpost back,
Mm-hmm.
we get to a point where we don't see the end of the track anymore, or the end
Mm-hmm.
of the field anymore, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
And then at that point, that's when it starts to drag for me.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both the montage or a dramatic assembly of the scenes and sequences themselves, and the screenwriting itself, or lack thereof, as it were. It feels as though that it was a screenplay generated by a focus group of those that have Netflix and Disney Plus subscriptions, and
Yeah.
they brought these individuals together, and that's where this came from. Each one of them had an idea. So instead of the producers saying, "Okay, I want two of these ideas. One can be our outside action plot. One can be our internal plot or our emotional drive." Just like, hey, that's a great idea. I like that idea. Let's just use all of it. And so he used all of these ideas from the focus group, and then it suffered, the pacing suffers on the page, but then you could have saved it a little bit in the editing room, but I don't think that there was a whole lot of attention paid to that aspect of film assembly, and we do wind up with that because one of my litmus tests is, and I've mentioned it on the show before, looking at my watch. When did I look at my watch? You mentioned about you were kind of in there about 45 minutes, 50 minutes into the movie. That's about when I looked at my watch. It was about an hour into the movie, looked down at my watch, and then I looked at it one or two more times thereafter. That's about when, because I was in there, not to the degree I was in the first movie, but sufficiently enough. And then it was just okay, okay, we're going there, we're doing this. Oh, we spent too much time on this. Wait a minute, I could have hung out there a little bit longer. And then it just the pacing ultimately makes this still what is about a 2 hour movie feel more like a 2.5 hour movie.
Yeah, well, I think the editing I definitely noticed felt really
Mm-hmm.
haphazard in this one at times.
Yeah.
Something that I joke about, I love Warren Beatty. I think he's a good actor and I think he's often a good director, but
Mm-hmm.
he does this thing where he cuts a scene right after the dialogue ends.
Mm-hmm.
Like the dialogue stops and then the scene cuts like 2 seconds later. Like there's no room for breathing. And this movie did that a lot. Like
Yes, it
the
did.
scene would end and cut to the
Yep.
next scene,
Mm-hmm.
like immediately. There was no room for laughs or anything like that. Like even the lines that were funny, you didn't have time to laugh at.
Nope.
Which is not to say that like they should leave like this gap for like a
No.
laugh break like a sitcom, but like still like there's no breathing room in the editing. And I think part of it, like you mentioned, it there wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to it. Well, I think this
Mm-hmm.
film like last fall,
Mm-hmm.
like I think there's only been like 4 or 5 months since the movie wrapped for them to
Oh.
post-production it,
Oh
which
my
that's
goodness.
a pretty quick turnaround for a movie like this. I mean, it's obviously not like Avatar where it's like they're spending so much time on like the special effects and everything
Yeah.
like that,
Mm-hmm.
but still it's a pretty quick turnaround
Yeah.
for like a major motion picture with like multiple storylines, multiple characters, multiple
Mm-hmm.
continents.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot, and I think that that might have hurt it. Like
Yeah.
it does feel like it was a bit of a rush production schedule.
Yeah, it perhaps it wound up on the same assembly line as the kind of the equivalent of the movie of the week on Disney Plus, and it wound up with that same team is just turn and burn, baby, turn and burn. You flip that script as quickly as you can. Well, you're listening to Real Talk on 90.7 WKGC. I'm your host, R.L. Terry, and today I am joined by returning guest and friend of the show, film critic Sean Boelman. Today we are reviewing The Devil Wears Prada 2, now in cinemas nationwide. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Real Talk on 90.7 WKGC. I'm your host, R.L. Terry, and today I am joined by returning guest and a friend of the show, film critic Sean Boelman, editor at Phantom Wire and member of the Critics' Choice Association. Today we are reviewing The Devil Wears Prada 2, now in cinemas nationwide. Now, before I get into characters here, because the characters in the first one memorable, and I want to take a look at how they translated into our sequel. I do want to go back and underscore some of the themes a little bit. I know we've touched on them, but I'm kind of curious to see if you picked up on the same ones that I did. So if we could go back to the story just for a moment. And we're both in agreement that there's too much going on here and an insufficient focus thereon. So ultimately, I was left with the idea of when a story is about everything, it often ends up being about nothing. Even though this movie wants to be about something, it introduces a wide range of social and cultural issues. We've got sweatshop labor right at the very beginning. Not a spoiler, listeners. It's within the first few minutes of the movie. So we got sweatshop labor, workplace culture, body positivity, decline of journalism, art versus commerce, and more. And any one of those would have made for a great movie, particularly the sweatshop labor, art versus commerce, or the decline of journalism. I mean, there's just too many things going on in here. Did you pick up on the same one, Sean, or there some additional ones that I missed that you picked up on? That it's just like, gosh, the movie wanted to talk about this, but it never really finished the thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think it hits on all those that you mentioned, and I think another one that it talks a lot about is like, well, not a lot because it doesn't talk a lot about anything, but it brings up like corporate mergers and like conglomerates and stuff like that. But I think again, a lot of these go together had they narrowed it down. So like, had they done like art versus commerce and the corporate conglomerates and the decline of journalism. Like those three things tie together really well. Had they not separated them out like they did and instead tied them all together in a way, it would have worked. So like, for example, not going into spoilers much, but like in the first 10 minutes of the movie, Andy's real newspaper job is she's fired because of.
And I love how they did it, by the way. I thought how they did that. It's like I was really encouraged, Sean, in that first our first significant scene. I was like, oh gosh, the movie is going to go there. And I thought this is going to be really thoughtful, compelling, have a nice emotional core to it. I'm like, we are going there. I was left a little disappointed later on, but we started going there.
I agree. But had that happened and the company that bought out her paper became the villain of the movie, I think that would have worked.
I think it would have worked much better.
It didn't do that. Like that's like an opportunity left on the table. In that, like, had that become the villain of the movie, that would have been the decline of journalism, art versus commerce, the multinational conglomerates all tied into like one thread that would have worked. But instead, we have like these different things that just should go together, but don't. Yeah. And I think like when you go into like the body positivity side of things, like that could have just been a punchline. Like there are ways that they could have worked that in as just jokes, which they do make jokes about it, but then they also try to make it like a subplot.
Yes.
Which then you feel like you're not doing enough because it is an important topic.
Yes, it is.
But for them to like treat it like it's on the back burner is almost as problematic as if they didn't approach it at all. So like had they just like made these repeated jokes about how Miranda is not body positive, I think that would have worked. Or had they dove deeper into it, that would have worked. But it's in this middle ground that it's just like too much there to ignore, but not enough there to be substantial.
No, that's it. It's just enough to be tantalizing, perhaps, but not enough to satiate. And so it's just there to, I guess, whet the appetite, but then there really is no meaningful delivery behind it. And I thought going into this, and I don't want to hang up on this the topic of the story itself, too long. But I thought going into it, it was going to be that Runway was in the tank. It was losing relevance. Miranda Priestley was no longer queen of the high fashion culture, and it was and because I'm going into it thinking the central idea is the death of journalism. And then we were going to explore that and find ways of showing why journalism and professional writing and art design and layout and photography on film, why it's important, because it is art. It's not merely commerce. It's there's a commercial side to it, because if your art makes no money, eventually you may not be able to make your art anymore. But we would have had those ideas, and that's where I thought we were going to go, particularly with that opening scene. And then she's like, okay, well, the movie's not, it's not going in that direction. Instead, it goes in a wide variety of directions. Like choose your own adventure there. But our four main characters are returning. But before we get to the rest of our characters, Sean, we have to talk Miranda Priestley. So there's so much that I know we can say about the rest of the characters, and I know we will touch on it before the hour is over. We've got to talk about Miranda Priestley herself. And my question to you is, are we witnessing an evolution or a dilution of Miranda Priestley? Because she's still powerful, noticeably softened, and the sequel seems to portray her adjusting to changing media, sort of, but losing some, if not most, of her former dominance. That we don't really lean into that either, though it is introduced. So, what did you make of Miranda Priestley 2.0?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of touched about this in the last question as well, where we're talking about like how workplace culture is kind of incorporated a little bit. I think we see a little bit in this movie. There's like one throwaway gag in specific where they're talking about how Miranda had a bunch of HR complaints.
Yes.
And she had to change her behavior because of the HR complaints.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that should have been more of the character's arc. Like fighting with this, like, modernity, if you want to say it that way.
Yeah.
I think that like we don't go enough into the character's arc for Miranda at all. Like she has a new partner. I don't think they ever say if they're married or if they're not. But she has a new partner in this one, played by Kenneth Branagh, who is like my least favorite person on earth.
Yeah, when I saw him in the movie, I'm like, oh boy, Sean's gonna love this.
Yeah, no, I will say, mercifully, he is barely in the movie.
He is.
So it didn't affect me much. But like, again, it's like one of those situations where like we have this thing that happened to her that we don't explore like at all. Yeah. Like, and it's a drastic change from the last movie, because the last movie she had gotten divorced in the middle of the movie, and that, or her husband filed for divorce in the middle of the movie, and that was a major character moment for her.
Yeah.
And now we're just accepting that she's with somebody new, and we don't learn about it. And like we don't learn about the HR complaints and her having to change to that. Like we don't learn anything about. Yeah.
The only one we really get to learn about, and it could have been funnier, but it was a funny moment when she was hanging up her coat and struggling.
Yeah, that was the throwaway joke that I was talking about.
Okay,
like can we get more about this character? Like we learn nothing about this character in this movie. There's no change at all. It is the most static thing possible, and I guess I can see the argument for it in terms of like the theme of like resistance to change, but that's also not really what she's doing, because they're talking about how she has spearheaded the transition from print to online, and she's embraced it. She has become an on-camera personality.
Mm-hmm.
So like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that she's not changed at
Yeah.
all in the past 20 years.
See, now this is where I think we may differ a little, Sean, because I don't feel that she's the same. And that frustrates me for some of the same reasons that you just mentioned, though, that we don't see this, we don't see that, this is never explained. I found her, it's like, this is not the same Miranda, even when I take into consideration 20 years later, changing media landscape, even taking all those things into consideration, HR complaints, just not the same Miranda. But yeah, I'd say she's not a believable. I mean, she's not the same Miranda, but she's also not a believable evolution of the character in this era. Instead, she feels like a sanitized, diluted interpretation, a kind of bargain bin version or Timu version, if you will, of the woman who once commanded every single room she entered. And while I'm willing to buy that people change, particularly over the course of 20 years, I just she there was no gravitas when she walked into the room, stepping off the elevator. There was just that energy that was so commanding before was absent. And I think that is such a part of this character, such a part of her, that no amount of change in the media landscape should have affected that. What do you
So
think about that angle?
I I think from a writing standpoint, I disagree. I think she's very much like written the same personality
Mm,
wise. I think the difference that you're talking about, that you're noticing, is a performance thing. I
mm,
think that at this point in her career, Meryl Streep knows she's above this. And
mm,
I don't think, like, it felt like the first movie she was doing to have fun,
mm-hmm.
and it didn't feel like she was really having that same level of fun with
Oh
this
no, she
movie.
did. Nobody in this movie looked like they were really having all that much fun.
Which is
Yeah.
strange because it should feel like a family reunion of sorts. And
Yes, it should.
from like the on-set photos and all that,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like that's what it should have been. But I don't know if they just have like a really good publicist, like only taking the happy snapshots behind the scenes or what. But like you didn't feel the chemistry
Mm-mm.
here. Like it
No.
felt like it did feel like everybody almost was sleepwalking.
Yeah, phoning it in, sleepwalking, and we have some other characters here that I want to touch on. We've got, of course, we've got our Emily, Nigel, and Andy. And now, in my opinion, Emily and Nigel come closest to feeling like their original selves, but really, neither has a whole lot to do. And while Andy has a lot to do, she feels like a low resolution facsimile of her former self. Looking at our four main characters here, Sean, which felt the most authentic to the original for you, and which felt like they were the most changed?
Okay, so I think we do disagree here as well. I think Nigel, I agree, is very close to his original, which again, I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that's necessarily a good thing. He's just like the sidekick again, which is fine. I mean, Stanley Tucci is great, and he's fun in the role. He's funny in the role, and I could watch Stanley Tucci travel across Italy, which I have.
Mm-hmm.
So sure, that's fine. Where I disagree with you, I think Emily's character is terribly written in this. Like they completely changed that character from what she was in the original movie to what feels like in, in the original movie. She wasn't necessarily a rival to Andy.
No. Mm-mm.
And in this one, it feels like we were supposed to assume that they were like at each other's necks. And
Mm-mm.
that's not really what it was.
Mm-mm.
And that's not to say like the arc in this one doesn't make sense. Like it does in a way, but
Mm-hmm.
like it feels like when we introduce Emily to the movie again,
Mm-hmm.
Emily and Andy are like angry at each other as if they had been like worst enemies in the last movie. And that was never the case. Like there was the betrayal of Andy going to France instead of Emily, but they were never like worst enemies. And at the end of the movie, they made up because Andy gave her like the
Mm-hmm.
wardrobe or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
And now like we pick up and it's like, oh, you. And I'm like, where's that coming from? Like why are they like mean girls now? Because that's not what they were in the last movie. And that's what really frustrated me about the Emily character.
Mm. So what about Andrea, Anne Hathaway's character? How do you think her character fared in the translation from the original to our sequel here?
I'm pretty indifferent towards her
Okay.
character in this movie, which is not a good thing to be about the protagonist of a movie.
No, it isn't.
You should not feel indifferent. If anything, it feels frustrating that she's going through the same thing again.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have the same thing of like she's left a quote better job
Mm-hmm.
to get this job because it pays more,
Mm-hmm.
and then she's torn between her ethics and making money, and then she has this boyfriend and she's torn between working and being a good partner, and it's like we're seeing the same thing from her character again. And I think that's a flaw of like the quote legacy sequel genre,
Mm-hmm.
is that we're like seeing these characters follow the same arc in like a almost remake style
Mm-hmm.
approach. And I think that's really frustrating to me with this character because again, like we go back to Miranda, and my argument for Miranda is that like in this 20 years, like what's happened in the 20 years, we
Mm-hmm.
hear them talk about what's happened in the 20 years. We hear them talk about how Andy's won all these awards and everything, and then like we just don't see it. Like we don't see the effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're told an awful lot, but a lot of what should be dramatized simply isn't. We're just supposed to buy that things are different. It's like on an exam when your professor asks for the answer and you give the answer, then he or she says, "Well, why?" Or whether or not you get it right is immaterial. You could get it wrong, but I know when in my years of teaching, I really cared less whether a student got a question right or wrong as much as I cared about why or how he or she arrived at that conclusion. It's like showing your work in math. And so we're given the results, but we really want to know, well, why and how, because to me that is more telling, more important than simply things have changed. Okay, well, how and why? What has shaped this? what
Right.
what has what has shaped where we are? And it's I think some of the side characters are sort of an attempt to do that, because in the first movie we have our four principal characters, and for the most part that's who we ever spend any meaningful time with, are these four characters. But in this one, we have an additional several characters, some of which are Andrea's friends, others are colleagues at Runway. We have several characters that each serve a function in an effort to get to some of that how and why, some of the themes, but then they ostensibly vanish, and they really feel less like people and more like plot devices or furniture, including Andrea's own assistant. Do you think these side characters, Sean, were there to try to tap into those whys and hows and into the themes? And because that's what I think they were, but again, not developed, and they just felt like furniture.
I mean, I think the condemning thing is that I could not tell you a name of a supporting character in this movie other than Lady Gaga, who is playing herself. Like that is the only character name I
Mm-hmm.
remember from this movie other than the returning characters.
Mm-hmm.
Like Like it's and we have this stacked cast. Like
Oh,
this
yes.
this cast is very big with
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of people in supporting roles. We get Kenneth Branagh, like we mentioned
Mm-hmm.
before, Lucy Liu,
Mm-hmm.
Justin Theroux,
Yep.
um, and then we have a bunch of like
Cameos. Donatello Versace is in
yeah,
there. Of
and
course,
then we
Lady
have
Gaga.
BJ Novak from The Office is in
Yep.
the movie,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have these like Gen Z like comedians who are like Caleb Heron
Oh,
is one of the supporting characters who's like a Gen Z comedian. He's
oh,
from
okay.
one of that like camp of like sketch comics
Mm.
that are like big on social media, and it's like we have these like recognizable faces that like cross generations, but like they're not doing anything. They're just there as
Mm-hmm.
if they're like it felt like back to your point about it being focus grouped. It's
Mm-hmm.
like who can we put in this movie that will sell tickets
Yeah.
if their name is on the poster?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think they put those people who would sell tickets on the poster and just didn't
Yeah.
know what to do with them. So they're like, we'll
Mm.
make Kenneth Branagh her partner. And then like we're like, we'll make BJ Novak this character. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay. Like at what point
Mm-hmm.
are you writing and at what point are you just like crafting a movie like a jigsaw puzzle?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great analogy. Well, you're listening to Real Talk on 90.7 WKGC. I'm your host, R.L. Terry, and today I am joined by returning guest and friend of the show, film critic Sean Boelman. Today we are reviewing The Devil Wears Prada 2, now in cinemas nationwide. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Real Talk on 90.7 WKGC. I'm your host, R.L. Terry, and today I am joined by returning guest and friend of the show, film critic Sean Boelman, editor at Phantom Wire, and member of the Critics' Choice Association. Today we are reviewing The Devil Wears Prada 2. Now, Sean, there's a line that Stanley Tucci's character of Nigel delivers right at the tail end of the first act when he and Andrea are talking about how things have changed, and she refers to Runway as a magazine. He's like, "Oh, girl, the magazine hasn't been around for years and years." And I'm not going to get his line correct, but it's something to the effect of, "I used to fly models to Morocco for a glossy 4-page spread featuring Dolce and Gabbana or Calvin Klein, Versace, whomever, and then but now I'm in charge of the pictures on Instagram that people flip through at lightning pace." And listeners, the line is much better crafted than that, but you get the idea. And I think this is one of those accidental moments of genius. We've been fairly hard, not harsh, but fairly hard on the writing behind here. And so I think this was accidental genius because it doesn't match up with the level of thought that goes with anything else that is in this movie. But I loved that line because in retrospect, having watched the movie now, the irony that's there. We mentioned earlier when we were talking pacing about how stuff is just happening. There's no room to breathe. You're just flipping through it, one right after the other. And so, in that, it takes us out of the story that we're just kind of watching these events unfold. And it feels like the movie itself feels like that line delivered by Tucci. Did you pick up on that? In retrospect, did you pick up on that in the movie, Sean? And what do you make about the truth that is dripping in his words?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I was thinking while I was watching the movie is that earlier this year, Matt Damon did an interview talking about Netflix movies.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about how Netflix requires people who are making movies for their streaming platform to restate the plot every 5 minutes in case of somebody is scrolling their phone. And this movie really reminded me of that. Like, even though it is a theatrical movie, it
Mm-hmm.
very much feels like, okay, we're like gonna just put everything here and we're going to repeat it and we're going to rehash it so that like if somebody misses 20 minutes of the movie because they're looking at their phone, they're going to understand it. It felt very much like it was concerned less with the box office of like storytelling and more with like second stream revenue. Like it felt like there were moments of this movie that were designed just to be turned into TikTok clips.
Yeah.
So it'll go viral when it drops on Hulu and Disney Plus. Like it very much felt optimized for like a later generation, which is unexpected because it is very much a nostalgia driven film too. Like you would expect it not really to care that much about appealing to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Because again, who in that audience is really going to go see The Devil Wears Prada 2? Like what 13-year-old today is going to want to see The Devil Wears Prada 2?
There weren't any 13-year-olds in the audience in my auditorium.
I think there were like 3 other people in the audience in my auditorium total.
Yeah, that's like same here. I think it was 3 or 5. Pretty sure, because I remember looking at the seat map. I'm like, oh well, I guess I can sit wherever I want.
But to be fair, we did go like early on a Thursday. Like I went like right after 4. So like a lot of people were still in work. I work 8 to 4, so I was able to get off early. But I think like we're in this situation where like this movie doesn't feel so much like a movie; it feels like content. Which I think is, again, like you mentioned, very ironic when we're having this character lament the loss of art and instead having to make content. And now we have this movie that feels like it is just content. Like a lot of people throw around the word cash grab for sequels.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'm like, This time I do think it is very much a cash grab. Like it felt like we're going to take this IP that people are still talking about, that people still want to see more of, and we're going to make a movie that will do well on social media. And that it's disappointed me.
Yeah, funny thing is, even upon rewatch of Devil Wears Prada, and I know you rewatched it recently, so did I. And I don't remember thinking, gosh, I wonder what's going to happen 20 years from now. This is a complete story. I feel satisfied. I don't feel compelled to need to know more. So somebody somewhere in one of these focus groups, I want to know who said, you know what I want to see in a couple of years? A sequel to Devil Wears Prada. I want to know in what meeting that one took place.
The other thing is like it doesn't do the things that you would expect a Devil Wears Prada sequel to do. Like we've talked about how this is like clearly an analog for Vogue. So why don't we have more about like the analog for the Met Gala?
Yeah.
Like if we had a movie that was all in, like if we took the journalism stuff out of it and we made a movie that was all in about like the crazy events that Miranda puts on, which she does. They talk a little bit about it. That's where Lady Gaga's cameo comes in.
Yeah.
Why don't we focus on something like that to make it different from the original, make it necessary? Well, not necessarily necessary, but justified is the word I'm looking for there.
I think you're expecting too much of your content seeking audience. They don't want to think too deeply because they would have to divert attention away from their phones.
You got a point there.
Well, you mentioned Lady Gaga just a moment ago, and I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the soundtrack. First movie had a killer soundtrack. This one certainly had a soundtrack. And one of the things that helped define the original was its music. By no means did the movie rest its laurels on the music, but it was a great accompaniment. That soundtrack had personality. It felt fashionable, energetic, and very much in tune with the world of high style and ambition. This time around, the music feels different. Much of the soundtrack is pleasant enough in the moment, but I found it surprisingly forgettable, especially after you told me, Sean, that a Lady Gaga had like 4, 6 songs or something like that for this movie. So I was like, okay, this soundtrack is going to be killer, but it was ultimately forgettable with one exception. And it's the one that we had in the original movie, Madonna's Vogue, which still carries an unmistakable sense of glamour and confidence. And when it plays, Sean, I was dancing in my seat. The movie suddenly felt alive, and it briefly reconnected with that bold spirit of the original. And even with the new material from Lady Gaga, it feels oddly restrained. Polished, yes, but lacking the theatrical edge and personality we've come to expect from her. What did you make of the soundtrack for Devil Wears Prada 2?
Yeah, so I will say, I think there's one more exception that I liked personally,
Okay.
and it was the first needle drop. Maybe this is just because I'm a shill for this artist. I thought the use of Dua Lipa's End of an Era as the
Okay.
first needle drop was interesting because, like, the first movie, it begins with "Suddenly I See,"
Mm-hmm.
um, which is a great way of setting the tone for like what the character's arc is going to be
Mm-hmm.
in the movie. And then so like we have this needle drop that is End of an Era,
Mm-hmm.
should be setting the tone for what the movie is going to be. It
Mm-hmm.
seems to set the tone for what the movie is going to be
Mm-hmm. In the beginning,
in the
yeah.
beginning, and then it turns into something else.
It
So
does.
so I will say I like the attempt with the
Okay.
use of that one. I don't think it doesn't follow through.
No.
Um, but I see the vision there. I agree the Vogue needle drop was good. I'm glad that they didn't go too heavy on like repeated needle
Right.
drops
Mm-hmm.
because then you're just pandering to nostalgia,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you're just having, oh, I remember that scene in the first movie,
Yeah.
which
Vogue works though, timeless. So
yeah, yeah,
Vogue is always going to work.
for sure. And for what it's worth, I do appreciate that this movie wasn't that. It does follow a similar arc to the first movie in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, but it doesn't feel
No.
like there are analogs for the scenes at least.
No. Uh-uh.
They like you look at and I love Top Gun Maverick to death. Don't get me wrong. I think
Mm-hmm.
Top Gun Maverick is one of the best Hollywood blockbusters we've had
Mm-hmm.
in a long time. But you do look at Top Gun Maverick next to Top Gun and you're like, okay, the football scene is the
Yeah.
volleyball scene. Like
Mm-hmm.
you look at and you see like scene to scene how it's playing out. This
Mm-hmm.
one, I appreciate the fact that you can't see it scene by scene. You just see the
No.
overall arc
Mm-hmm.
mirroring each other.
Yeah.
Um, so I do think that if we had included more needle drops from the
Mm-hmm.
original, that it would have turned into that like scene by scene mirror.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we didn't. In terms of Lady Gaga's songs, I think she did 3, and I
Okay.
only
3.
know 2 of them.
Okay.
Which one of them was the single that was already released,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the credit song, and they use it once in the movie, which was Runway, and I think that was okay. It feels very 2000s Lady Gaga pop, like it feels early Lady Gaga.
So, what did you make though of our concert number? I by no means needed. I didn't need a concert movie. I did not need to it to be terribly protracted. However, it felt just kind of shoved in there, like it was forced in there, and it did not deliver
So I think
what
that
I was expecting to get when I see, oh my gosh, Lady Gaga's in the movie and she's going to sing. I, it just maybe that's just my personal expectations of her as an artist, but it didn't feel like her.
yeah, so I agree. I feel like that scene felt out of place within the
Mhm.
film. The song itself, I think that's the better of the songs.
Yes, agreed.
I thought that song was better than the Runway song, which is annoying because if they do an Oscar campaign for the song, it's probably going to be Runway because that was the radio single that they put out.
Mhm.
They didn't put this one out as the radio single. So, like, more people know Runway already. They're going
Mhm.
to know that. They're going to run with that if there's an awards campaign. Not saying either one of them is necessarily worth an award, but I
Mhm.
do think that the concert song, which was "Shape of a Woman,"
Mhm.
was better. It was a more interesting song with more interesting lyrics that better reflected the movie and like the movie's topic and theme versus just, oh, I'm going to make a song about fashion and runways that's really poppy and
Yeah.
energetic. I felt like Shape of a Woman actually had something to do with the theme of the movie,
Mhm.
But again, like you mentioned, like it wasn't a show-stopping performance, which I think goes back to what we were talking about of like we're told that these events that she puts on are like legendary. Like we're supposed to assume that this event that she's putting on, that Lady Gaga is performing at, is like the equivalent of Milan Fashion, where it is part of Milan Fashion Week, I think, and it's supposed to be like this huge event that everybody wants to go to, that they put millions and millions of dollars into. And then we see a couple of models strutting down the runway and Lady Gaga with a microphone and a slightly weird dress. And like even by her standards, it's not that weird of a of an outfit. So like it tells us a lot. But it doesn't prove it to us. Like if we're talking about like this is a dominant person who is still asserting that she is the queen of fashion, tell us why. By showing us this extravagant event.
I think we can. We're here near the end of the hour, and I feel everything we've talked about kind of centers around this idea that the movie feels engineered for. It feels more engineered for engagement than crafted for impact, because motion pictures should have some level of conviction, clarity of purpose, and characters who evolve in meaningful ways if we're talking a sequel like we are today. And it just doesn't seem to do that. I feel that the original film had bite, had fire, if you will, but this one just does not leave much of a mark, and I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it right there, because listeners, we are about out of time. But Sean, for listeners that would like to follow your reviews, connect with you on social media, how can they do that?
My reviews are on Fandom Wire, so you can check me out there. And then for social media, I am on Instagram, Letterboxd, and X as @BigTuneOnFilm.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for joining us once again on Real Talk. Always a pleasure. And listeners, that is a wrap for today. If you missed any of today's episode or to listen to past episodes of Real Talk or other shows on WKGC, we are on a podcatcher near you. Just search for WKGC Public Media on your podcast service of choice. Stay tuned for Jazz and a Minor Key with Walter Hale coming up next. Thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you'll tune in again next week, same time, same place, for more Real Talk on 90.7 WKGC.